In 2013, I was 21 years old and studying abroad in South America with my college roommate. I had more than one unsettling encounter down there, but I'm an experienced traveler and generally have good instincts, so I can't say that I have any other thrilling stories aside from narrowly dodging a few muggings. Other than the general sense of unease that can come with being a solo female traveler, our 4-month stay was relatively unexciting. Relatively. At the end of our program, we decided to stay for some extra time and do some more casual backpacking. We ended up deciding to hike the Inca Trail, amazing for anyone considering it. For the unfamiliar, you start in one location, which varies depending on the trek you choose, and then you end in a small town near Machu Picchu called Aguas Calientes. Your return trip is covered by your hiking company, unless you choose to stay, in which case you get a refund. Well, we were in a new town, and our company left immediately after lunch. We wanted to spend the night and get the most out of being in that part of the country. Time came, and we said farewell to 11 of our 12 hiking companions, and were joined by one other of our new friends, who was planning on starting an additional hike in the morning. Our guides gave us our refund, and gave us very careful instructions on how to get back to Cusco, the city we had originally departed from. When you're ready to leave, make your way to that train station right there. Don't go anywhere else. That's a very official and safe train. Once you get to the last stop, go to the official bus station, and it'll bring you back to Cusco. We understood, thanked them, and parted ways. That night, we went out drinking with the remaining member of our hiking party. He didn't drink because of his grueling hike the next day, but we had a blast and felt safer for having a male with us. Overall, we made sure to keep our wits about us, and it turns out to be a very fun night without incident. We make our way back to the hotel, wish him well on his travels, and go to bed, ready to explore town the next day before catching the train home. We go out and have our fun, then make our way to the train station. It's a very nice train, not unlike the ones I take in the US occasionally, maybe even nicer. It definitely felt safe. The train pulls into the final station, and we begin trying to locate the bus station. We ask a gentleman who clearly works at the stop, and he points us and tells us to walk about a half-mile that direction, and that we wouldn't be able to miss it. I want to pause here to emphasize all of these conversations and the ones that follow are entirely in Spanish. This is important because it's good for you to understand that I was speaking a language that I was extremely proficient in, but not too fluent. It's not too difficult for native speakers to talk too quickly and avoid being understood. We walk for what doesn't seem to be enough time, less than half a mile for sure, before coming across a bus station. I'm shocked to say the least, but I'm also reminding myself that I come from a much nicer part of the world, and I need to put aside my preconceived notions. It has a sign clearly labeling it as the bus station, and it says To Cusco right on the sign. To be clear, it's not a fake sign. It's similar to a sign marking a gas station from a freeway, a big thick pole, and the actual sign was probably 50 feet in the air. It couldn't have been a temporary trick. Otherwise, I would have been much more suspicious. Aside from that sign, though, well, it was something alright. The buses were all classic bad news white vans. You know the ones. Again, I checked myself. How many people could possibly travel to Cusco in a day here? It wouldn't make sense to have a giant 20-plus seater bus doing the trek every day. There's a tiny wooden building, presumably an office underneath the big sign. But we didn't need to go there as there are 2 gentlemen standing outside near the vans. We asked them if these are the buses home, though we can clearly read the sign, and the men confirm. We ask how much the tickets cost and when they plan on departing. They give us the price and say that it's 5 to 10 minutes, then direct us to a van to sit and wait in. We both sit down, and I'll admit I was pretty uneasy. Again, I'm an experienced traveler, and I do know not to expect modern luxuries in the less developed parts of the world, and there's nothing outwardly sinister about this bus stop, but it just wasn't what I was expecting. even for the area. My roommate doesn't seem to be sharing any of my trepidation, however. She's a bit more sheltered and generally trusting, so that's fairly in character for her. I'm also an over-worrier, so between us, we were probably both on the more extreme side of the appropriate emotion. We wait for 10 minutes in this van, which we've left the door open due to the heat. We're just talking and swatting flies which are buzzing in and out of the open door. I'm unsurprised that we're not on schedule, as I know they're trying to avoid wasting a tank of gas on 2 passengers and are trying to wait for more people. But we have an hour's drive ahead of us, and I want to get going, so I decide to ask. They tell us it's about 5 more minutes. More time passes, and I can't shake the feeling that we aren't at the right bus station. Though nobody made mention of there being more than one in a tiny town, so I keep telling myself I'm being irrational. I decide to go see if anybody is in the office and just get some more information about the place. I open the door and walk in without much hesitation, given its positioning under the giant sign. Well, I walk into what's clearly a residence, not an office, and about 15 sweaty Peruvians cooking beans and looking shocked to see me. I stammer out, is this the bus station? They look confused and then say, "Oh, the bus? Yeah, the bus. Go outside. Talk to the men." I back out and apologize for intruding. I go back to the van to report the experience to my roommate, right as another girl walks up and says, "Bus to Cusco?" She's clearly a native Spanish speaker and not a foreign tourist. The men immediately say yes and place her in a different van, which makes no sense if they're trying to fill one van to take us to the same place. This skeeves me out more than anything else that's happened yet. I pop my head in the van and tell my roommate to keep hanging tight. I walk over to the girl in the other van, where she's also waiting alone, and ask her if she's going where we're going. She confirms this to be the case, and I explain we're going there as well, and I'm not sure why we would be in separate vans. She looks generally unconcerned, so I go back to our van and sit down. My roommate hasn't left, and we've been waiting there for probably near 30 to 40 minutes at this point. I'm starting to express my concerns to her, but she's being somewhat dismissive, which I can't blame her for, as I'm generally an anxious person. We get pretty quiet, and resign ourselves to waiting, still swatting flies and dabbing our brows on our shirts. I'm now sitting quietly with my mind going wild with possibilities, and extremely suspicious something is wrong, but also conceding there's nothing too concrete justifying my concern. At this point, I'm picturing some sort of ploy to abduct foreigners or something. It's not a good feeling. The flies are driving me absolutely mad at this point, and now I've decided they're probably hovering around the car because someone was murdered in there and the blood wasn't cleaned well enough or something. At this point, I'm just torturing myself in my mind. The train of thought continues, and I look up to see hundreds of flies are swarmed and crawling on the roof of the van. I realized we hadn't noticed because only a few would be flying around at a time, and the van was rather spacious. My roommate and I were closer to the front, while the mass grouping of them was closer to the back. I'm frozen in fear at this point, unsure if this is confirming my theory that somebody was murdered in the car or if I'm letting my imagination run wild. I'm basically hyperventilating. I wish I could emphasize just how many flies were in there. I gesture upward to my roommate, who looks up and then appears shocked. At this point, I can assume I'm shaking my head and muttering. Right as this happens, the other van with the native girl begins to pull away. I make a snap-second decision. I'll launch myself out of our van and start sprinting, and slam my hand on her van to bring it to a stop. She opens the door in shock, and I grab the door to hold it open, and say more forcefully than I thought I had in me, "We're coming with you now." I look back at my roommate who's just staring, and I yell, "Grab our bags and run now!" She knew better than to mess with me when I was in crisis mode, and comes sprinting out of the other van with both backpacks in hand. The 2 men come sprinting after her, saying, "Don't go, we're leaving now, we leave now." I shove my friend into the car and scream, "Sorry, but we're riding with our friend here," and slam the door closed. The native girl, looking unsettled, just tells the driver we're friends and to drive. At this point, I don't know that this driver isn't in on whatever I was afraid of, but if he was, they didn't plan on messing with a local. Either way, I just saw her as our best bet out. We pull out onto the road and drive for a few minutes, when I see, you guessed it, the real bus station. A very official, legitimate-looking bus station with actual buses, which was probably about half a mile from the train. I have no doubt this is where we were supposed to go, and I feel the blood drain away from my face. I thought about jumping out of the van and running, but in a split second I questioned if it wasn't for official tour groups or anything else I might not be considering. As we drive, I'm looking for street signs, landmarks, anything to indicate we're actually headed to Cusco. All I see is wide open desert plains and nothing else. I sat the rest of the drive frozen in fear, collecting a pile of makeshift weapons from what I could find in the back of the van. This included a sharp piece of car from some previous collision and a small fire extinguisher. I told myself if anybody tried to hurt us, I would kill them first and then figure out how to avoid a Peruvian prison second. I spent the entire car ride telling myself that I had it in me to kill someone if they tried to harm me. I gripped my weapons until my knuckles turned white, when suddenly the van comes to a complete stop, very much in the middle of nowhere. The driver accepts a phone call, which I can't understand. He gets off the phone and slowly told us that he just remembered he can't take us all the way there. The native girl looks concerned, which makes me even more paranoid, and he proceeds to point to a large but desolate building and tells us to go in there and find a ride the rest of the way. Looking back, I'm not sure how I avoided throwing up from anxiety and fear. The three of us journey in there, my weapons abandoned as I couldn't sneak them out of the van, and people just keep pointing us farther and farther back, until we come to a back opening that leads us inside. I wanted to run, to somehow undo this entire journey, but we really had no choice other than to stick with the native girl. We had no alternative methods of transportation. There's no civilization in sight, and honestly, I'm not even sure what part of the country we're in. All I know is that we're 60 to 90 minutes away from wherever the train stopped, hopefully in the direction of where we're supposed to go. We get to another van, this time with the opposite problem. They're insisting we fit 10 plus people into a 7-seater van. They try and take my backpack, saying it needs to go on the roof. That backpack had my passport and every resource I would most certainly want in an emergency. I'm thinking that they can take it over my dead body, which may very well be happening, right as I see my roommate happily passing hers to the lady. I grab her arm angrily, and ready to ask what on earth is wrong with her survival instincts, but my face must have said it all because she backs up and uncertainly tells the lady never mind, that she'll be keeping her bag with her. The lady looks aggravated, and says they won't fit in the car with all the people. I tell her we're happy to hold them as I climb in, and demonstrate in a way that will require her to force either me or the bag out. She relents, and my roommate crawls in. We sit in the back with our backpacks towering on our laps in front of us, my roommate looking somewhat inconvenienced. Honestly, I thought maybe I was overreacting, but it was better than underreacting. We drive a long while, and finally enter the city borders of Cusco. On one hand, I'm relieved because now I know exactly where we are. On the other hand, the surrounding areas outside of the main square are extremely dangerous shantytowns, and we're the only foreigners with giant backpacks on the bus. No sooner am I thinking, well, at least we're close, when the bus driver turns and says he doesn't want to drive further, and we can figure out our own way from there. Even the native girl immediately goes on red alert and offers to pay more if he'll take us to the city square. He declines, kicks us out of the bus, and drives away. We're looking at the people staring openly at us, and she asks in a scared voice if we'll split a cab with her. We immediately agree. Problem is, in this part of the world, a cab is often the first car to drive up and assure you they'll take you where you're going. Not very official. And this is exactly what happens. A Corolla from, I'm sure, 1993 pulls up and tells us to hop in. Our friend looks wary, but decides it's better than winging it out in the open. He drops us in the town square without incident, and at this point the native girl looks like she's aged 5 years since we first crossed paths with her an hour ago. I'm sure I looked even worse. She meekly says, "Well, I'm glad we got here safely." I can barely talk because I'm so exhausted, and we part ways. I had a few incidents on this trip that made me a believer that no matter where you are, one traumatic experience makes whatever the last place you slept like feel like home. Let me tell you, the hostel bed felt really good. I haven't thought about this in years. It's funny how pretty much every story on here starts that way. I was in 5th grade when this all started. Now let me say first, there were many events that happened from when I was in 5th grade to about 8th, but here I'm only really going to talk about 2. Someone knocked on the door. Back then, my neighborhood was considered to be pretty safe. We never locked our doors because we never really had any reason to. I went out to the door and opened it, but nobody was there. I honestly didn't think much of it, probably one of my brother's friends or something, so I turned on the porch light and went outside. Once again, as far as I could see, there was no one out there. I went back inside and sat in the living room to watch House until my mom got home. A half an hour goes by, and I'm sitting on the couch, which looks onto my kitchen, the kitchen window, and partly out into my backyard, though at this time it was about 8 p.m., so it was pretty dark. With my head facing the left side of the room watching my show, I saw something dark flash by the window. It was quick, and it was only out of the corner of my eye, but there was something there. A few more minutes go by, and I'm texting my best friend, Sam. I told her I thought someone might be trying to prank me or something, when I started to just feel really uneasy, like somebody was watching me. I looked up, and I shit you not, there was the outline of a person all in black in the fucking window. I sat there paralyzed, staring at him, and he lightly knocks on the window and does one of those closed-fingered waves that you do to children before he disappears. In my head, I was thinking, no way that just fucking happened, and even if it did, I was sure it was just one of my brother's friends pranking me. But either way, I wasn't gonna stay in that living room to just let them mess with me some more. I booked it to my room and locked the door. My mom came home about 20 minutes later with my brother Harrison. I asked my mom if she saw anyone out there, and my brother if he intentionally had someone mess with me, but they both told me no. Harrison really wasn't that kind of person to do something like that, but I figured with it being so close to Halloween, anything was possible. I tried to put it out of my head, and that was that, at least for a little while. Some insight of what happened in between these two events. I'm fairly certain it wasn't any of my brother's friends. To this day, I honestly don't know who it was and what they really looked like. But after that day, I started noticing someone in the backyard. They would be standing there with black shoes, black pants, a black hoodie pulled up, black gloves, and I was never able to see his face, so I assumed a black mask as well. Each time this happened, I would run and tell my mom, but by the time she got there, they were always gone. I started to get phone calls from an unknown number around that time too. There would be just silence and occasional breathing, but nobody ever said anything. It only happened a few times, probably less than 20, but they would happen at random times throughout the day and night, though mainly during the night. For a long time, I was the only one who ever physically saw any of this happening, because it pretty much always happened when I was home alone, or really late at night. Until one day, my mom, my neighbor, and I were on the porch talking, when I asked him if he ever saw anybody lingering around in our backyard. My mom quickly called my name, because I guess she didn't want me to sound crazy to the neighbor, since I kept saying all this was happening and she never saw anything. I mean, she picked up the silent phone calls, but for some reason she never really believed me about the guy in the backyard. But to my surprise, he told me he did. He ended up telling my mom and I that he was sitting out on his back porch next to ours with his girlfriend when a man in all black came out from behind the tree line. He started walking and then running towards them when my neighbor, who had a license to carry, pulled out his firearm and told the guy to stop running. The guy didn't stop. Matt, the neighbor, shot at the ground and the guy finally stopped. He turned around and started running in the opposite direction, tripping over a branch and then getting up and disappearing. I felt so relieved, thinking that had to be the guy, and that surely he'd never come back now. But of course, that's not how it happened. Now before I get back to it, let me explain. My mom didn't frequently leave me home alone. A lot of the time I was left with my brother, who was 7 years older than me, or a family member. But there were a few times where my mom had to work, went shopping, or went out that I would elect to stay on my own rather than tag along or go somewhere else. So on this night, I was home alone once more. I was in the living room, and because things had mostly died down a bit with the man in the backyard, I felt comfortable enough to sit in my living room and watch some TV again. This time I can't remember what I was watching, but just like the first time, something black flashed by the window. At this point, I was thinking, this can't be happening again, and I didn't immediately want to call my mom and ruin her night if it turned out not to be a big deal. So I just stared intently at the window, waiting for him to pop up like he did the last time. During what felt like an eternity, and probably was only 5 minutes, I had muted my TV. And there was an eerie silence like in one of those action movies, where you think that it's too quiet. At that moment, I could probably have heard a pin drop, but instead I began to hear my back door rattle. My heart dropped and started racing, and I felt like it was going to leap out of my chest. And they were trying to break down the door. From where I was, whoever was at the back door couldn't see me. As I heard my door being broken into, my fight-or-flight response must have kicked in, and I grabbed my phone, unlocked the front door, and hauled ass across the street. I started bawling my eyes out as I ran down random side streets and alleyways to get as far from my house as possible. I ended up sitting under a lamplight, pretty much on the other side of town. I called my mom and her boyfriend Kyle, but they could barely understand me as I was blabbering so much. When I was finally able to calm down, I explained to them what happened and where I was, and they immediately came and picked me up. In the car, I felt so much safer. Kyle was a big guy. He did construction and worked on houses. He had muscle, and he was a scary dude if you didn't know him. When we got home, Kyle went in first. He told us to stay in the car, and from inside the house he yelled out that the back door was wide open. He went room to room, floor to floor of our house, searched our backyard, shed, everything, but whoever it was gone. My mom later tried to comfort me and say maybe it was our cat, but we both know it couldn't possibly be that. Our backyard was pretty hard to get into in the first place, and that fucker was blown wide open. I saw the guy in our yard a few times after that, always just standing there in one spot. I started sleeping with a knife secretly tucked away by my bed, but eventually he stopped coming around. It took a while, but he did, and luckily nothing like that ever happened again. I also think it's very important to add that nothing had been stolen from my house that night. There were no drawers open, and the door to my basement is right across from the back door. It's often kept open, and it had some pretty expensive equipment down there, but it wasn't even touched. So because nothing from my house was taken, we didn't call the cops because, like I said, for a long time my mom didn't believe me, and once she did, we had no evidence, and eventually it all stopped anyway. To this day, I have no idea what that man wanted or why he tried to break into my house, but my mind continues to come up with ideas. I was only 10 or 11 years old at the time it all started, and I was probably around 12 or 13 when he tried to break in. Both times I was home alone. I'm almost 20 now, and although I don't really think about this too much anymore, I still always find myself watching the window in the back door of my house. Sometimes I still get that eerie feeling when I'm home alone, but I can probably blame this subreddit for that. I'm sure he's been gone for a long time now, though I don't think I'll ever be able to go into the backyard alone again. So here's a story from when I was 19. The funny thing is, it doesn't really stick in my memory as a scary moment until I stay in a caravan. Then when the lights start going off, it usually comes flooding back. For a bit of context, My older brother, as dearly as I love him and owe him, is a bit of a dipstick. He's one of those people who goes through life on instinct, but the snag is his instincts are generally terrible, and it gets him into a lot of scrapes. Every so often, one of those ends up involving me. One thing he kicks ass at is driving. Our dad's a mechanic, so since my brother was a preteen, he's been fixing up and racing a certain model of car. He's never made much money from it, but as long as he's kept in fags, weed, and booze, he's a happy bunny. Historically, I've never gotten on with his girlfriends. This is in part down to the difficulties I've had befriending other girls throughout the earlier parts of my life, but mostly because my bro has a knack for picking up complete head-the-balls. So when we were chatting buzzed one night, he told me he thought his new girlfriend Chantel was the one. I decided to drag myself back up north to meet the poor unfortunate. I can be pretty judgmental, and when I met Chantel, I formed a snap judgment that she was no different to his usual fare of crazy. She had the look he goes for, permatanned, platinum blonde girl with huge jugs crammed into a tracky top. Her nails, you can tell a lot from a girl's nails, were cherry red witchy things bolted on with glue, and far too long to allow you to do anything practical. As I entered our living room and saw her, she was pecking away at the screen of her smartphone like a bird trying to text. She barely acknowledged me as my brother introduced us, and I think the look I gave him said it all, because before long he was nervously chattering away about anything and everything he imagined we had in common. I made all the effort I could after a 4-hour drive, but she and I could barely hold a 2-sentence conversation together. When my dad called me into the other room and offered me a beer, I all but sprinted out the door. "What do you think of Chantel?" he asked, casting me the sidelong glance he uses when he expects me to go off on one. I belched at him and left it at that, not really knowing where to begin. "You know, your brother is pretty taken with her," he says. At this point, I pull what my family calls Sam's iguana look, where I continue to face the TV but look at my dad to the side. "What do you want, Dad?" "Well, you could go with him to his race this weekend." I pretty much spat my drink out at that, since his next race was in Scotland, and I'd just finished my long-ass drive. "Come on, it'd mean so much to him." Nan didn't take to her, and you know what he thinks about your ma's opinion. Admittedly, this should have been a red flag. My Nan is like a bullshit-seeking missile. She's old enough that she doesn't give a fuck. Just picture Olenna Tyrell from Game of Thrones, but Irish and constantly carrying a pack of 20 Regal in her bra. But I'm sentimental sometimes, and my big bro is such a massive fanny that my opinion is probably quite important to him. My dad senses my hesitation, and presses home the advantage until I'm cramming my luggage back into my car, along with my brother's gear and Chantel's Barbie pink suitcase, which I'm pretty sure is big enough to serve as a viable alternative to the Soyuz capsule. My bro leads the way while I follow in my battered old Golf, making painfully awkward small talk with Chantel in the passenger seat as she picks away at her phone. The first 2 hours are unadulterated hell, but eventually we start to talk a little more. And when I mentioned that I'd recently been dumped by my boyfriend, she actually switches off the screen and consoles me. She makes me feel better by putting some music on, and we bond a little bit. By the time we get to my brother's friend's place in Scotland, we're getting along really well. The place we're staying in is one of those fixed caravan sites. I believe they're called trailer parks in the US. It was a little dingy, especially since holiday season is mostly over, and people are leaving ahead of the site closing for the winter. But at the same time, the setting is beautiful. We get set up inside. Bro and Chantel will get the bed. I'll get to hear them knobbing from the converted sofa, and since light is fading and Chantel is complaining about not having 3G, my bro decides to take her to poker night at the local pub. I stick around at the caravan, because I knew I'd get separated from the others, and probably cornered for some awkward conversation with a pervy old man if I went. They haven't been gone for much more than an hour when Chantel starts texting me. I don't know if it's FOMO or just generally being bored with her surroundings, but I figured that at any one point in time she's probably texting 4 or 5 people. I don't mind. There's fuck all on TV, and with just my music playing in the darkness, my thoughts keep drifting back to my boyfriend, so I'm feeling sorry for myself. Her texting style irritates me a little. She keeps using text speak but sending really long messages, and because the signal's patchy they keep coming through either incomplete or in the wrong order, leaving me to piece together what she's talking about like I'm a Memento or something. She also does this weird cross-eyed tongue-out emoticon at least twice per message. After a while she starts to talk about how the game's getting good, and stops sending messages. Right as I'm drifting off to sleep, I get a call from an unknown number. I decline it out of hand. I've had the same number since I was 15, and made some very poor choices with companies I gave it out to. Then almost immediately, the same number dials me again. At this point I'm getting pissed off. The boyfriend who ditched me has developed a habit of getting drunk and then calling me looking for an easy shag. I decline the call again, and ignore the voicemail. A short while later I'm jerked out of sleep by Chantel. She's texting again asking if I'm still awake, and if my bro left the keys to his car in the caravan because he can't find them. I say yes, and ask how the poker tournament went. She says, "Very well. Which caravan is it again?" At this point, I'm rolling my eyes. "The one with the model of my brother's car outside, you daft bint," I reply. Over the music from my headphones, I hear a noise. It sounded like a man's laugh, but not my brother's. I'm not really sure that's what I heard, but it's isolated as fuck out on this campsite, and my heart's starting to race, so I stand up and go to the door. I can see fuck all through the peephole. It's literally black outside. There's just no light pollution out here. But as I pull the earphones out, I can hear someone crunching around in the gravel. I damn near shat myself when my phone vibrated in my hand. Another text from Chantel. "Let me in." For some reason, this was the point where my standard alone-in-the-dark scaredy-catness turned into full-blown fear. I think it was because the footsteps I could hear were way too heavy and were trying to be too quiet. My brother's quite light-footed, but a loud drunk, and I just know I'd have heard him and Chantel coming from a mile off, or my bro would have impersonated a werewolf or something that would have utterly failed to put the shits up me. He's also like a fucking homing pigeon, and there's no way he'd have needed telling which caravan it was. I looked down at Chantel's few texts, and saw a difference in style. Shorter, capitalized, not so informal. I stood frozen in the darkness. I have no idea how long for. I figured they were after the car, hence asking about the keys. My mind then ran through a detailed CSI-style post-mortem of them finding my body, riddled in stab wounds and bukkakied to death. I was wondering if it was just theft I had to worry about, when my stream of thought was interrupted by a series of bangs and a snapping noise like a whip crack. Suddenly I can see light through the peephole. I'm in full flight or fight mode now, so it takes me a while to lean forward and look through it again. The security light of the caravan opposite is on, but the door beneath it is warped and bent from being forced open. I can see one of them rooting around inside while the other stands by my brother's car. Then came the words, "The girl's not here." As usual with me, flight went over fight. Pretty much as soon as I heard that, I went into the bathroom on the far side of the caravan and pushed the window open. I was sure they'd hear the noise I made getting out. First, my shoes squeaking against the fiberglass, then the crunch as I landed on the gravel. But I didn't stick around long enough to figure that out. I bolted into the raised woodland just behind the caravan. Not far, but far enough that I had to feel blindly ahead of myself in case I walked into a tree. And once I was completely disoriented, I waited. I waited there for a long time until I heard the first crash of another door being broken, and no more than a minute later, the sound of screeching tires peeling out. I never came out until I heard my brother calling for me. Even then, I waited until I could see that they were alone. I damn near throttled him when Chantel told me he'd been bragging all night about how he was going to use his poker winnings to buy new brakes for the car he raced. Being the doting older brother, he was absolutely livid that I had stood by while his car had been pinched and not taken his keys with me for a jolly little game of cat and mouse. I had no idea how I got mentioned at this poker night, but I'm very glad my brother's now wife texts like a child on morphine, and that my scumbag ex dumped me so I could mope in the dark. I wish I could say this is the first and last time that my brother nearly got me killed, but it's not. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys like the video, please feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback or suggestions for stories you'd like to see, or anything like that, be sure to leave a comment below, because I always read all of the comments. I have a pretty big update for the channel for you guys. So, as you guys probably know, things have been pretty rough lately for the YouTube horror narrator community. Basically, on YouTube, a bunch of advertisers pulled out, and now everybody's getting way less returns on their views and everything like that. So, I wanted to announce that I finally set up a Patreon account where you guys can donate and contribute to the channel if you like. Of course, it's never necessary. None of my content will remain necessary to be paid for or anything like that. Basically, what Patreon is it's just a tip jar for artists if you feel like supporting them. Of course, if you don't have the money or anything like that, please don't feel like you have to or anything. It's just there for people who want to. So I'll be leaving a link to that in the description of the video, and also probably in a comment with the timestamps for stories for this video. Please give me feedback on what you guys think about that. I'm a little bit nervous about it, but I hope it will go over well, and I hope you guys understand why I'm doing that. If you'd like to contact me, or if you have any stories you'd like to send in or that you'd like me to read, please be sure to take a look in the description of the video below. There will be links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the header of the email, or whatever you choose to send, what the title of the story is, what the theme of the story is, if it has any, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious about the music used at all in this video, the music is always in the description below, in the order which it appears in the video, and I also leave links to the artists themselves in case you like their music and would like to give them support and check out more of their work. And of course, if you have any constructive criticism, please be sure to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.